Well, hello, my friends. It's a beautiful, sunny day out here for the first time all winter, and I've got my windows open. So you're going to hear some sounds going on outside my window for a while in our study, praising God through prayer and worship. And here we are. We've come to the end of week 18. And as usual, I'm just going to read to you what is on day 7. God's loving kindness, we said earlier, is everlasting. So any covenant that contains it is as immutable as the character of the covenant maker. If an immutable God makes a covenant, he won't break it. In fact, he can't. If God's love is part of that covenant, it won't end. God is immutably faithful to the subjects of his covenants. How comforting. In the Psalms, we've seen the term covenant almost 20 times now. The rest of the Psalms include only 3 more references. Psalm 105 contains a clear reference to God's covenant with Abraham. And if you want to know more about that, well, Precept has a study on covenant that you could take. The link is in the description box. As the text says, God made an everlasting covenant with Abraham. He has kept it to date and will keep it into eternity. He confirmed this by oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, 3 generations. In it, he promised the land of Canaan for an everlasting inheritance. The rest of the psalm details God's keeping that promise. Psalm 106, verse 45, relates to the fulfillment of this promise too. It predicts that Israel will be released from captivity to return and repossess its promised land. The Abrahamic covenant promises more than land, so when it's referred to, it's important to understand the rest of the story. Genesis 12, 15, 17, and Galatians 3 give us important details. It includes descendants as numerous as the stars in heaven, a great nation. It promises that those who bless Abraham and his nation will be blessed, and those who curse them will be cursed. It promises that in Abraham all families of the earth will be blessed. This will occur by means of a descendant, seed, from his own body through Sarah, his wife. Finally, this covenant is everlasting. Abraham believed God, and this faith was reckoned, counted, accounted, credited to him as righteousness. Galatians 3 makes clear that those who share his faith are his descendants. Those who believe the promised seed of Abraham receive God's covenant promise and loving kindness to Abraham. Galatians 3 also makes clear that God did not promise many seeds, but one seed. That is Christ. So all who believe in Christ are heirs of the promise of Abraham, including Gentiles, those who are not Jews. You and I are part of this covenant promise of God. In making this covenant, God took the form of a smoking oven and flaming torch and passed between the pieces of flesh Abraham had cut out. This reflected a cultural custom of cutting an animal in half, laying 2 pieces opposite one another, and walking through them saying, "If I break this covenant, let this be done to me." Since God passed through the pieces, not Abraham, and God cannot lie, his covenant is inviolable. God, the covenant maker, will keep his covenant. Jacob, Abraham's grandson, took his family to Egypt to find food. After a long time, 430 years, God brought the nation of Israel, the descendants of Jacob, to Mount Sinai in the wilderness and made a covenant with them, which we call the law. Consisting of 10 commandments and nearly 600 additional ordinances, this law, according to Galatians 3, was added to the Abrahamic covenant. It did not replace it. The law defined sin and provided methods, rituals to approach a holy God and live a holy life. The purpose of this law was to be a tutor, to lead God's people to Christ, to be justified, declared righteous, by faith. Now that Jesus and his atonement have arrived, God's people have no need for the tutor. In Jeremiah and Ezekiel, God declares that one day he will make a new covenant with Israel and Jacob. The Gospels, 1 Corinthians, and Hebrews all state that this new covenant is entered into through faith in Christ. This is the covenant in which all who believe the gospel are now made righteous and have become heirs of the Abrahamic covenant promises. Righteousness has always been by faith, as we saw in Abraham's response to the covenant. It was never by works, by the law, which was intended only to lead to faith. So the everlasting covenant to Abraham looks forward to the new covenant, with the same promise of everlasting life for those who believe. And in this way, all of us, from the nations of the earth who believe in the gospel of Jesus Christ, fulfill God's promise that Abraham will be made into a great nation and that all other nations will be blessed in him. You are blessed. Perhaps you should thank God and sing praise to him as the psalmists did. You think about that, and I'll see you in the next one.